All right, officially welcome everyone. My name is Hala Alawi, and on behalf of Atmosphere Press, I am so pleased to welcome you to today's live author reading of new historical fiction. We'll be hearing from Karin Ciholas reading from The Bronze Door, released August 6th, Caroline Willcocks reading from Of Aragon, released September 3rd, and Leissa Shahrak reading from Half the World, releasing on September 25th, just tomorrow. All three authors' books can be purchased from online retailers and from select bookstores. And of course, the books can be found on Atmosphere Press's website. That's at atmospherepress.com/books. I'm also going to put some links in the chat so you can easily find all three books online. At the end of today's event, we are going to have time for audience questions. So during the readings, if you have a question for one or more of our authors, go ahead and type that in the chat and I'll make sure it gets asked. And then during the actual meeting itself, please stay muted, but feel free to use the chat for praise and comments in addition to questions. One last note is that we at Atmosphere Press appreciate your support today and always. If you have a manuscript of your own, we would love to read it, so submit your work today to books@atmospherepress.com. Again, thank you so much for tuning in and supporting Karin, Caroline, and Lisa today. We're going to start off with our first reader, who is Karin. She was born in Virginia and grew up in Switzerland, where she studied classical languages. The study of Latin and Greek led to her fascination with the ancient world and its history. She earned advanced degrees in languages and comparative literature at UNC Chapel Hill and enjoyed teaching modern languages and courses on the ancient world. She lives in Sarasota with her husband, author and theologian Paul Ciholas. The Bronze Door, which we'll be hearing from today, opens to a turbulent time in history when great courage is needed to defy a tyrant. In this story of courage, faith, and love, witness the unfolding drama against the backdrop of a world torn between cruelty and humanity. And now let's welcome Karin.
Thank you, Hala. This is the book. I have to turn it the right way. We are at a point in the novel where we know that Caligula is emperor, and he has ordered his Roman general to Jerusalem to put his statue in the temple where he wants to be worshipped as a god. The Jews fear a bloodbath. You will meet three characters: Rachel, who is abducted from her home and sold into slavery; Sedek, a pious man who rescued her from slavery and married her; and Simon, her brother, who has just come to tell us that their father has died. He is holding her in embrace and trying to comfort her. And she says, Rachel says, "It was good of you to come and bring this sad news in person." "That's not the only reason why I've come." After their evening meal, Simon asked to speak to them in the peristyle. Rachel was caught up in mourning the loss of their father and was hardly listening to what Simon was telling Sedek about the situation in Judea. When Simon stopped pacing and turned to Rachel, she realized that both Sedek and Simon were waiting for her reaction. She made him repeat what he had just said. "You must go to Valerius and beg him to retreat with his legions before it is too late." Rachel rose abruptly and faced Simon. "I will not do what you ask." Her voice was shrill, her shoulders tense, her face flushed with anger. Simon looked at Sedek for help, but he sat in his chair and did not look at her. Simon placed his hands on her shoulders and pressed her down on her stool. Then, like a schoolmaster, he stood in front of her. Rachel, we have run out of options. There are no choices left. You know that I've already begged Valerius to bring his legions back to Antioch. In vain. I believe you. Well then, it's up to you now. Rachel shook her head. She felt like screaming at him, screaming at both of them. Simon's passionate pleas made her feel she was about to suffocate, and she gulped for air. But worse was Sedek's stony silence. How dare they come to her with such a request? Simon turned to Sedek. You must help me persuade her. Sedek did not answer. Simon took her hand. You must consider what is at stake. There are thousands of lives at stake. People like you and me, children who will be killed, maimed, or orphaned, women who will be slaughtered or widowed, men, good men, who will die if you don't do this. As we speak, Valerius is getting close to Jerusalem. You are asking the impossible. Simon sighed and began pacing in the peristyle. Purple heliotropes glistened in the spray from the fountain, and shimmering waves of late summer heat rolled off the marble floors and engulfed them, stifling them. Rachel remained motionless, staring forlornly at the tiles at her feet. Finally, Rachel raised her head and glared at Simon. Why me? Simon stole a glance at Sedek and answered, because Valerius loves you, and he will do what you ask. Rachel shook her head and turned to Sedek aghast. He held her gaze. Then almost imperceptibly, he nodded. She felt her face flush with mortification. Sedek's eyes seemed to penetrate her soul. And suddenly she realized what her anguish had already told them. Sedek spoke, his voice solemn and low. Rachel, I have known for a long time that you love him. It is a reality I learned to live with long ago. Rachel bounded from her stool and fell at Sedek's feet and clasped his knees in the age-old gesture of the suppliant. Simon's voice was cold. My one goal is to save as many lives as possible. Personal feelings cannot get in the way. Rachel crumpled against Sedek's knees. Sedek said, Rachel, this is not nearly as difficult as you make it out to be. You have been through far worse. You remind me of the first night I met you. You cried like this until all your tears ran dry. You recovered then as you will recover now. Rachel said, "You cannot make me do this." Simon grabbed her by the shoulders and pulled her to her feet. "You must do a noble thing for a noble cause." His grip on her shoulders was painful, the fierce look in his eyes frightening. Simon began to shake her in anger. Abruptly, he let go and addressed Sedek. "Tomorrow, I leave for Galilee to see Valerius. She will accompany me." Rachel regarded Sedek with pleading eyes and waited for him to speak. When he remained silent, she whispered, "When I was a slave in this household, I was treated with more dignity than this." Sedek winced. "Rachel, you cannot mean that. You must forgive Simon. You know his temper, his determination. He does not understand how you can put your feelings for Valerius above the lives of thousands. He does not feel he is asking that much of you. And you? How do you feel?" "I would gladly go in your stead if it would do any good." "Then you think me wrong?" Sedek sighed. "I am not your judge." "That means you think I should go?" "I think you should go." Rachel put her face in her hands and sobbed anew. Sedek remained silent and did not try to comfort her. "I cannot believe my husband and my brother would use me in this fashion. It is unworthy of you." "Is it unworthy to attempt to save thousands?" "You are asking me to throw myself at him, to abuse his feelings for me. You are asking Valerius to die." "Remember the purpose of our request." "As my husband, you should want to protect me, shelter me from this turmoil." "My dear Rachel, these are terrifying times we live in. All of us need to make sacrifices for the greater good. If I thought you were walking into a dangerous situation, I would not let you go. But you know as well as I that Valerius would never harm you." "Sacrifices? I don't see sacrifices being made here." Sedek reached down to her tear-stained face and caressed a wayward curl, smoothing it behind her ear. "The fact that I must explain seems to make it worse. For too long we have avoided speaking the truth. Simon dared to say it this afternoon. You love Valerius. He loves you. How do you suppose I feel sending you off to him? Who is making sacrifices now?" Rachel lowered her eyes. "Rachel, you have brought joy to me in my old age, and I am blessed. but do not make light of my sacrifice. Sedek, you are asking too much. You are my husband and I love you. Do you? He clasped her hand in his and held her gaze. To send you away breaks my heart, but the Most High has given us courage according to our needs. He asks a great deal of me. He asks a great deal of you. You are in the position of Esther of old, to be the instrument of salvation for your people, for our people. Remember what Esther said, for how can I look on while my people suffer what is in store for them? How can I bear to witness the extermination of my race? We cannot be let personal feelings get in the way. Rachel felt way too insignificant to be compared to Esther. That's the reading.
All right. Thank you so much, Karin. And thank you for, just giving us that insight into this relationship with those characters. I think that was a really great snippet to give us a sneak peek at this book. So reading next today is Caroline Willcocks. Caroline has worked in the theater, freelance journalism, and charities. Now she combines being a solution-focused therapist with writing about the Tudors and Stuarts. She also has a successful podcast called Tudor and Stuart Fairy Tales. Her 2 adult children are happily married, and she hopes she doesn't embarrass them too much. She loves to travel and has visited many countries, including Syria, Iraq, Kosovo, India, and the United States. She lives in the idyllic county of Herefordshire in the UK with her beloved husband, dog, and 2 cats. Recently, she discovered she is a direct descendant of Edward III. Today, we'll be hearing Caroline read from Of Aragon, in which Cat Cook, a young girl captivated by the allure of Henry VIII's magnificent queen, Catherine of Aragon, embarks on a journey to unravel the mysteries of her own birth. As she navigates the intricate web of Tudor court politics, Cat witnesses both the splendor and deceit that define life within the Queen's inner circle. Caroline, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. We join Cat in the Queen's chamber, in Queen Catherine of Aragon's chamber, one night. Usually, I stayed with the Queen until she retired to bed, when I would be sent away to sleep in the maid's dormitory. But one night she asked me to comb her hair before she put on her nightcap. She had beautiful hair, real red, with golden highlights in it. I loved to comb it. It smelled so sweetly of roses. I stood there with her sat in front of me, lulled by my regular movement of the comb. It was as if it was just the 2 of us there. The candles flickered, and the firelight cast shadows around the bedchamber. The ladies moved quietly, putting away the sewing and the books. "Stay with me tonight, Cat," the Queen said softly. "You other ladies go to your beds now." She spoke so quietly, but we all knew that it was an order. Scarcely pausing, the ladies curtsied and made to leave the room. They wanted to hasten to their husbands, who were waiting for them. I continued combing, hypnotized by my repeated actions and the silky feel of her hair as it fell to her waist. Outside, there was the sound of men's voices. Catherine started from her reverie and whispered an order. "Prince child, go from here." But the door was already opening. I made for the large oak 4-poster bed and dived into it, pulling the covers over myself. Who was this, and why were they visiting the Queen so late in the night? It was dark and warm in the bed, and the sounds were muffled. At first, I could hear Catherine talking softly with a man, but I couldn't hear what was said. Then Catherine raised her voice. Husband, you talk sweetly to me, but I cannot share your bed tonight. I am bearing our child. So it was the king she was talking to. I knew that he visited her chamber sometimes, but I had always been away before he arrived. Sweetheart, I do not wish to risk my most precious gifts, you and our child. I have not come to share your bed. I come to share news. I've been dining with Wolsey and the French ambassador. By heavens, that man knows good wine. I could hear coldness enter the Queen's voice. As a Spanish princess, the French were to her old enemies. She didn't like the king entering into arrangements with them. She much preferred the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles, who, as well as ruling over much of Spain and the Low Countries, happened to be her nephew. So, husband, of what have you been talking? She inquired icily. It must have been great matters of state to entertain him privately. We are working to build our friendship with France. The king said, you will know, madam, that the King of France has a new baby son, born this year. Our daughter Mary will prove a fitting bride for him. What? She is but 2 years old, the Queen cried. I could hear the anguish in her voice. Her darling daughter becoming almost a hostage to Spain's oldest enemy. It was too much to bear. Indeed, madam, the king replied brusquely, and the Dauphin of France is but 4 months old. They will not be married for many years, but I intend to have them betrothed this year. Betrothed? How could you do this to me? Sire, you have heaped many troubles on my head, and I have borne them as a good wife should. Why, even now you are playing with Bessie Blount, dancing attendance on her, as if you were a callow boy. Mind your tongue, wife, Henry snapped. As you know, I would not harm you, nor our unborn child. But all kings have mistresses, and why should I ignore a lady's fine eyes or dainty ankle when they are offered to me as my right? You are my husband, Catherine responded. Sometimes I think you care nothing for me. She spoke hoarsely. And now you plan to take my dearest daughter from me and give her to those libertines, the French. I cannot believe that you could send her to such a fate. I heard her rushing towards him, and then a muffled slap. Was he hitting her? I tensed up under the bedclothes. But it was the king who called out, Stop, madam! Contain yourself! I peeped out from under the covers. He was leaning down over her, holding her by the wrists. I noticed his beringed hands, strong and white. His shirt was open, and I could see the golden hairs of his chest. Standing there in control, he was a handsome man. He spoke to Catherine forcefully. Wife, you are with child. You have baseless fears and fancies, and I understand that. But you have always acted as a queen, and you will continue to do so. Our daughter will leave us one day. It is her destiny. Be grateful it's not Scotland she's going to. He chuckled at his own wit. It was only 5 years since the Scots had been roundly defeated by the English at Flodden Field. Yes, sire, and I was regent when we defeated them. You might remember that you were in France fighting the French. They were our enemies then. He sighed. And now they are our friends. We fight, we make friends. It is the way of the world. He let go of her wrists and took her face in his hands. My queen, we have been at war these days, but I want peace. Sweet Kate, show me you still love your Henry, your loyal heart. Yes, sire, she answered softly. You know that I love you. I will always love you. I am your queen, and if you order it, I will always act as you desire. He bent down and made to kiss her. She made no move away, and they moved together. I dived right down under the bedclothes, praying that they would not move in my direction. They were murmuring to each other and kissing. His voice was caressing. My sweet Kate, my love and my queen, what would I do without you? How would I rule this kingdom without you at my side? My lord, I love you dearly, she whispered. At night, I long for your touch. I want you to be close, to never let me go. With this, he took her in his arms and pressed her to him, his hands roaming down over her nightgown, following her hair down to her waist. She sighed deeply. I was feeling more and more afraid. What would happen if Henry found me hiding in his wife's bed? Catherine had told me to leave, but there simply hadn't been time. What would I say? And how would I brave the displeasure of the king? They moved together towards the bed. Henry was watching his wife, but Catherine had seen me. My lord, she cried, we cannot lie together. I would not be able to withstand your passion. She's clever, I thought. She can manage this lion tenderly. See, I have a serving girl already abed, warming my place for me. She pulled back the covers and exposed me, shivering. Henry looked shocked and then scowled at me. Why did you not tell me, wife? Why is this foundling in your bed? I hated being called that, and the anger rose in me. I don't know how I did it, but I sat up and said, Your Grace, I am no foundling. My mother was a good woman and a true Christian. I stared up at him defiantly. His eyes hardened and his lips started to tremble. What had I done? Been disrespectful not only to my elders, but to the King of all England. Quickly, I bobbed a curtsy on the bed, but fell back into the tangled sheets. I beg your pardon, Your Grace. My mother would have been angry with me, for she was always telling me about disrespecting my elders and betters. I cast my eyes downwards, praying that he would forgive me. Catherine interrupted. My lord, she is a new little maid. Who is so handy around my chambers, and she is so small and dainty. See, she has spirit. A snort erupted from the king. I was alarmed. Then I realized he was laughing. Spirit she has indeed, wife. Well, she's a comely little thing. You can keep her. But tell her that if she ever breathes a word of this night, I shall cut her ears off. Do you hear that, wench? I nodded quickly. Yes, sir, I did. I promise I won't say a word. The king swept out, still laughing, leaving the queen looking pensive. Cat, she said, looking into my eyes, if only you knew what queens have to endure. She put her arms around me. But now, my little maid, it is time to sleep. Come, let us lie together. And so we lay on her big soft bed, her arms around me. The embers of the fire flickered and we slept.
Thank you so much, Caroline. We got so much up and down with that exchange, so that was a really great choice.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Our final reader for today is Leissa Shahrak. Leissa experienced the Iranian Revolution firsthand when she taught English in Iran. Her writing credits include stories published in Del Sol Review, the Bellevue Literary Review, and a British anthology, The Final Chapter, Writings on the End of Life. A lifelong traveler and enthusiast of international literature, she now resides in Asheville, North Carolina, with a chess aficionado, a spoiled Shih Tzu named Ming, and the occasional black bear. Today, we will be hearing Leissa read from Half the World, which takes place in 1977, when newlyweds Angela and Doug Weston embark on a journey to Iran for work, unaware of the impending Iranian Revolution. As past and present secrets strain their relationship, the escalating political and personal tensions threaten not only their marriage, but also their lives. We'll hear more now from Leissa herself.
Thank you all for being here today. Here's the cover of my book. And I'm going to read two short passages. The first one occurs right after Doug and Angela Weston have arrived in Isfahan. They are in a taxi with three other Iranian men, which is how one got taxis. You shared them. And they are rolling along the streets. Hordes of men paraded the sidewalks. A few women hobbled along with shopping bags loaded with limes and greens, onions and cantaloupes. Several hunched over as the wind threatened to slip veils off their heads. Others held their chador's edge in place with their teeth. A gust caught a beige chador and sent it bellowing, its owner scrambling after it. Seconds later, the runaway veil blew across the faces of two men and momentarily masked them as they strolled, holding hands, carrying nothing. Ahead, men in military fatigues crowded in front of movie houses, one of which advertised a kung fu film. The other displayed a steamy poster, scarlet lips, eyes dusky with coal, abundant cleavage. Strange, Doug whispered, rolling his eyes. Angela nodded and turned away, her senses overloaded. It started when the cabby let the three male passengers in, near a yellow brick building with decorative tile on its facade, but no name. The taxi driver glanced at the building and then kept an eye on the rearview mirror, as if he were assessing their reactions. Angela stiffened. The facilitator in Doug's company's orientation had mentioned that nameless buildings might house Savak, the Shah's dreaded secret police. The adjacent roundabout featured a statue of the Shah in its center. The taxi circled the statue and turned north. Khiyabane Shaharbak. The driver was apparently playing tour guide. Dirty water oozed through open ditches, cluttered with decayed greens, melon rinds, and cigarette stubs on both sides of the main north-south artery, which the cabby had just called the Street of the Four Gardens. The stench brought Angela's breakfast into her throat, and she swallowed hard. Some shopkeepers had lowered their lattice-work grills for the hottest part of the day. Others napped on mats or carpets at their shops' entrances. The taxi rolled north. Due north, Doug told her, through the city's center. The exhaustion of long-distance travel swept over her like a cloudy trail of jet fuel, and added to the unease the unnamed building had initiated. She cared little about international politics, but the regime's human rights violations distressed her. Her stomach churned and she shuddered, overcome by nausea and terror of what she imagined inside that yellow brick sawdust building. Instruments of torture, odors of burning flesh and involuntary defecation, bloodied bodies and shrill screams, all concealed from the public. And anonymity for such a prominent building must contribute to the fear, paranoia, and rumors essential to a tyrant's grip on power. In Iran, she and Doug might not have the luxury of ignoring the ramifications of megalomaniacal politics. The next little piece I'm going to read you is from at the end of Angela's first day of class when she is teaching an advanced class of freshman English at the University of Islam. Something rattled and Angela turned away from the window. In the last row, a male student shuffled papers. She recalled that he had slouched into her class late. Bushy eyebrows slanted in a V above his nose. One of his lips curled over an incisor. Spittle foamed from a corner of his mouth. He must be one of the village students the government brought to the university on scholarship. The other students seemed more relaxed and confident, better dressed, likely better educated. Would his university classmates taunt or tease or downright bully him? If so, she had to protect him. Hossein Rahimi, I believe. Angela smiled at him. For some reason, she imagined him dressed as a mullah, camel-colored robes slipping off his lopsided frame, a white turban topping off his oversized head. I am a Gaye Rahimi. With proper Islamic modesty, he lowered his eyes when he answered. Angela hid the gold bracelet she had bought in the blonde bazaar under her sleeve, aware of the gesture's futility. Earlier, the bracelets had clattered against the chalkboard as she wrote her name and the page numbers for tomorrow's reading assignment. Are you from Esfahan, Gaye Rahimi? I am from village near Natanz. He struggled to force loose pages into a notebook. Your family is there, then. A breeze from the open window at the back of the classroom ruffled several sheets of his paper. They slipped over the edge of his notebook and slid to the floor, a flock of sheep plunging blindly over a cliff. He groped for the errant beasts under the radiator. She envisioned his mother huddled over a charcoal brazier in a mud brick house, stirring thin, lemony soup. Mr. Rahimi must feel out of place here. She would help him adjust, but his attire would likely serve as a detriment to his acceptance by other students. Grimy white shirt open at the collar, frayed cuffs, double-breasted pinstriped black coat, 2 buttons missing, matching pants, too short, dirty tennis shoes, too big. His face was shaved. His head was shaved. His face was not. Your family must be proud that you attend the university, she said when he rose with dusty papers wadded in his fist. He threw his hands up as if he were brushing away flies. They do not understand. They cannot even read Quran. He scowled, still averting his gaze from her face, the traditional attempt to avoid temptation. You have family, he said. She found his accusatory tone strange, but she followed with a short description of Doug. I'm happy to have you in my class your first semester. I do not want to be English as student. His bluntness shocked her. He had adopted a strained look during class. He must have had trouble catching the English. But when she had enunciated her policy on cheating, Mr. Rahimi drew himself up straighter and glowered at her. She made an effort to keep her expression unaltered, although she cringed in response to his open defiance. Cheating was the last thing she had expected to become a point of contention. Mr. Rahimi flopped back down as if he had no intention of going to another class. I want to be engineer, but my exam bad. No good enough. I missed English. His frown engraved the V of his eyebrows deeper into his forehead. I know only a small English. I hate English. She twisted the cap on her pen, her cheeks growing warm. She could understand why a villager like Mr. Rahimi might not want to teach English to rich children in Tehran. Many of these children had fathers who held posts in the Shah's government. But English would get Mr. Rahimi nowhere in the village. The course content required for the advanced class of freshmen would overwhelm him. Offering to tutor him in her office would set him apart from his peers and smack of favoritism. It would also humiliate him. She needed more time to determine how best to help him. He needed more time to feel at ease in her class. Mr. Rahimi slammed his notebook shut. Out of it stuck wrinkled sheets of paper soiled with dirt and cobwebs. On the notebook's top were inscriptions written in Arabic. Floral borders in colored ink surrounded the words, likely verses from the Quran. Mr. Rahimi, on his feet now, cast a last disparaging look around the empty classroom. As he brushed past her and bolted through the open door, he growled the word shaitan twice, leaving her to gasp and speculate on just what or who he considered to be Satan.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I think it's kind of interesting to just see these perspectives and understand that this really is, oh, my camera is blurring, but this really is an experience that a lot of people went through, and obviously coming from your own personal experience. So yeah, thank you for that reading today. At this time, we do have time for our audience Q&A. So if anyone has a question for one or more of our authors, go ahead and type those in the chat and I'll make sure they get asked. But we do have a question to start us off. This one is for all three authors. What inspired you about the time period your book is set in? So maybe we could go in reading order. So Karin, do you want to start us off with this one?
All right. Can you hear me? I'm so glad my audio is still working. Well, when I started learning Latin when I was only 12, that's what you do in Switzerland, I fell in love with Rome. I fell in love with Latin, believe it or not. And then 2 years later, I started Greek, and I think I've lived in the ancient world ever since. I really enjoy reading the historians of the time, and every time I pick up one of them, one of the books that we have that have been kept from that time. So many books have been destroyed, but those that we do have, there are always stories there that need to be told. And I zeroed in, of course, on the first century because of biblical characters and because of the turmoil created by Rome. At the same time, the nascent Christianity, that period, is fraught with all kinds of problems and violence. And I really enjoy that period. Now, I probably am somewhat faulty to do that, since basically for the most of my life, I was a French teacher and in love with France as well. But I did teach courses in the liberal arts on the ancient world.
Yeah, so a natural step to then start putting stories into that world as well. And I'm so happy that you did. I think a lot of people can really relate to sharing that fascination with the ancient world. So it's lovely to see those stories come to life. Caroline, what about you? What is it about this time period that inspires you so much?
Well, I loved history at school, and for our A levels, which in the UK is like between 17, 18 before university, we studied the Tudors and Stuarts. And it's just, if you're British or part of the kind of diaspora of British people that have spread across the world, in some cases not to any great benefit to the rest of the world, but anyway, that period, it laid the foundations for the modern Britain, and to some extent other countries. It wasn't true to say that Henry VIII got us to become Protestant because he wanted to go to bed with Anne Boleyn, but there were Protestantism, and the Reform was growing, but that was the catalyst in a way, and that break with the Church of Rome, and I think it's a bit like Brexit as well. It affected history from then on, and it also brought in, and I like to look in that book about the differences between the approaches of the traditionalist Catherine of Aragon and the new reformers. It brought in ideas which kind of led to more ideas of equality, and that was developed later in the Stuart era as well, with people like the Levellers. And once these ideas kind of got out of the box, there was no putting them back, even though successive monarchs tried to. So that's what I really am fascinated by. And it was an era where love and death were so close together, and it was so risky. And I know when I was working in charities, it was not a very you could always, the project could lose funding, and that was it. You were on the dole. And I used to read books about the Tudors, and I used to think, well, at least I'm not going to get executed tomorrow. So I mean, I absolutely love the period, and so that's it really.
Yeah, I mean, just hearing you talk about these far-reaching, I guess, consequences or at least effects, going so far back, but in the grand scheme of things, it's really not that far back, right? So I
Yeah,
can totally see where that would just get the mind moving and thinking about those kinds of things, and exploring that in writing is a natural next step.
yeah.
Um, and then Lisa, we'd love to hear from you as well. What inspired you about this particular time period so much to write about it?
Well, I lived through it. I lived through it firsthand, as you mentioned before. And also, I wanted to explore what happens in many cases to marriages when people from one country migrate to another country to work. So often it is that one of the individuals seems to adjust more to the new environment than the other. For example, I also wanted to show a little bit of all sides of the question that was pervasive right then with the Shah's demise and the upcoming reign of the Ayatollah. It's not as simple, I think, as many people in this country believe who haven't been exposed to it. And so there are in my book, I hope, all kinds of Americans and all kinds of Iranians that interact with each other. And nothing is black and white. That's one of the first things you learn when you're in the Middle East. Do I think of it as historical fiction? Well, it is technically, but then that means that I'm historical, and I'd rather not think of that. So
Certainly the most recent time period of the three books by a lot, but yeah, I mean, I really like that you mentioned that a lot of things that seem like they're just black and white, especially in parts of the world where we don't live or where we're not from, there's just so much nuance and different perspectives there. And I think that's a really important way to bring a book to life. So I hope everyone is as excited to hear about that as I am.
well, I do
We
want
have
to say one thing.
Sure.
Thank you, Caroline. It was the BBC that kept us alive during that period.
Oh, well,
BBC reported it right.
oh, good. The World Service, I guess.
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes, yeah. Yeah, I used to listen to the World Service quite a lot. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. We do have another question for all three authors. This question is, what kind of research do you do to bring the time period or setting to life in your writing? Maybe we can go in reverse order this time. So starting with you, Lisa. Might be
Very,
a little bit more straightforward for you as well.
very little. I mean, I remember these things, and occasionally I had to check myself on something. And I did have a cultural review by a couple of friends of mine who she's Iranian and he's American, but they read it and helped me with some of the transliterations of some of the words that you really can't translate directly into English. And so basically those, not
Yeah,
much
those kind
else.
of right, direct kind of references or just I guess double checking kind of thing.
Occasionally I would double check on a name or something, but
Right. Yeah, Caroline, what about you? Obviously, it's a different experience
Yeah.
pulling back centuries.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, it's a bit like a map where you've only got a few points. For this one, I read a very good biography of Catherine of Aragon by Giles Tremlett. Really good biography. And then I read books about Tudor women, social history. There were books that gave details of like what would happen in the birthing chambers, what might happen at Christmas, all of this. And I did an awful lot of reading, and I went to places as far as I possibly could. I went to Hampton Court, and but then when you're actually working on it, I had to do quite a lot of kind of on the spot research. So at one point, the characters, I wanted for Kat to meet the Queen, and it was the summer of the sweating. So the royals were out of London, and I had to find out where they could be, and I put them in a place called Woking, which is a kind of out on the outskirts of London now, but it was a little village then. And the royal family had a palace there, Woking Palace. And then I was able to find out from the internet that the king's messengers went on one route at that time from London down to Portsmouth, where the Tudor fleet was often moored, and that went straight past Woking. So I was able to kind of tie things together. So it was a combination of doing a lot of reading before, and then thinking, help, Google, and then kind of going on to the sources that Google gave me. And there were things like historic royal palaces and stuff like that. They come up with all sorts of details. And then looking at pictures, Holbein's pictures are wonderful. So yeah, I mean, all sorts of things really.
Yeah, pulling from these multiple sources. I know it's such a big kind of topic. Like a lot of people are interested in that particular time period. So I'm sure that provides a wealth of information to kind of have to dig through. So yeah, a lot to build off of there. I'm not sure if the same is true for you, Karen. Is there a wealth of information to go off of, or how do you do your research for the
There
time?
is there there are a lot of books about the ancient world. A lot of them, of course, are scholarly and they go back and use the sources we have, but we have new sources too in archaeology. And I've been fascinated, especially by the excavations that have been happening in the last 10, 15 years of ancient Alexandria, which was a major city of light at the time. It was the place of the famous lighthouse, which stood for 2,000 years as the tallest building in the world. And the things that fascinated me most were the things that I knew nothing about until I started the research. Things like how many Jews in Alexandria and in the diaspora were in positions of high office. For instance, the prefect of Egypt is going to be a Jew. The alabarch of Egypt is his uncle, and he was the financial officer of the imperial household, the advisor to the emperor. And according to Josephus, he was the richest man in the empire. There were just so many little details that you learn as you read all the books about that period and the original books that were written then that fascinate. And I did a lot of research on ancient medicine, going back to ancient Egypt, where they have deciphered the language and how advanced some of the medical procedures were back in 1000 BC. Because of embalming, they learned a lot about the human body even before that. And this was transferred to the University of Alexandria, which was the museum, the big library. And there, if you look at what they knew then, and which was then lost later on, some of their medical practices were more advanced than we had up until the 20th century. I was fascinated by engineering too, because for instance, at the temple of Serapis, they had a little coin slot machine where you put in a coin and you got holy water in the 1st century. They figured all this out. They figured out the first steam engine, but they thought it was useless. It wouldn't do anything. So they used it to remotely open a temple door. All this kind of stuff I find absolutely mind-boggling. So I used a lot of that especially in the first novel, where one of the main characters is an engineer and he learns how to do all these things.
Yeah, I can imagine just reading some of these things and knowing what we know now. It can just be such a mental experience, really. So I'm just struck by how much reading goes into it and how much just fascinating things you learn in the whole research process. But at this point, I just want to say that it was so wonderful to hear all of these books in the voices of their creators. So thank you so much to Karin, Caroline, and Leissa for being here with us and sharing your words, your books, your thoughts as well, your process. And thank you to everybody in the audience as well for coming to the event and celebrating these authors alongside us. Don't forget that you can order the Bronze Door of Aragon and Half the World. I'll put those links in the chat one more time for everybody. And then please also consider checking out atmospherepress.com to browse our new and forthcoming releases, sign up for our email newsletter, or submit a book manuscript of your own. You can submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com and just let us know that you attended today's event. Otherwise, we'll look forward to hearing from you, but have a great rest of your week, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.